Ordinary scribes and writers too were free-floating in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Thus, Muslim scribes copied epics like the Ramayana for their own reading pleasure, and you have evidence of this. While Hindu poets composed works such as Imam-e-Ketcha and the Jaunama. Songs and pachalis of the folk-based syncretic Peer traditions, such as those dedicated to Shottapir or Shottanarayan, Ghazi Kalu and Malik Pir, were composed in a lively East Bengali dialect with its naturalized share of Perso-Arabic words and intended for both Hindu, and this is very important, for both Hindu and Muslim audiences. In their dialects and literary repertoire, the Peer pachalis echoed the East Bengali ballads. So this is the fluid linguistic world that we encounter in the folk literature of the times. And we see how, subsequently, and I'll go on to talk about it, we see how, on the one hand, while a Sanskritic Bengali is being shaped for Hindus, 1870s onwards, there's a Muslim search for self-identity. And this Perso-Arabic language, dominated vocabulary and language, is actually picked up and promoted by religious leaders, particularly in the Nasihatnamas, to popularize their messages, because this is the most important vehicle, they think, for the popularization of the messages, and therefore this is the language that they pick up. This is very Perso-Arabic in its orientation, and very, within quotes, Islamic in its orientation, because the earlier language, the syncretic language, is no longer fulfilling the needs or the drive for self-identity that is being felt by Muslims 1870s onwards. And a very important scholar who has worked in this area, and this is not my work, is Rafiuddin Ahmed, who I pick on in order to help you understand how there was a parting of ways for the Bengali language. So on the one hand, you have the Hindu-Sanskritized Bengali, and on the other hand, you have the Perso-Arabic vocabulary kind of becoming the banner of Muslim self-identity late 1870s onwards. How am I doing for time? All right. There isn't a great deal left, so we're reaching the end now. So let's move on to the Nasihatnamas, and this is a very important genre for us when we are talking about this bifurcation. Hunter, who's a very important, W.W. Hunter, who's a very important official and ethnographer of the time, thinks that it's the Wahhabi movement in Lower Bengal and the circulation of religious literature or Nasihatnamas which led to the popularization of the Perso-Arabic strand in the Bengali language. Rafiuddin Ahmed, the scholar I had been referring to earlier, thinks that the Islamic way of life fused with the consciously styled Bengali that had more Perso-Arabic and Urdu words, and these are to be found in the Nasihatnamas. Sukumar Sen, the other literary scholar that I have been talking about from time to time, thinks that the Musalmani Bangla was the Maulavi's reply to the Pundits' Shatubasha of the early and middle part of the 19th century. So just to showcase to you the different opinions of scholars on this version of the language that shapes up 1870s onwards. The end of the 19th century saw much opposition to un-Islamic local practices, and printed Nasihatnamas or manuals of religious instruction of the later reformists of this period worked hard to reverse the trend. And this here I'm entirely relying on Ahmed's work, because this is not something I have researched, but what I have looked at in my work is actually the Musalmani Bengali literature that was being printed by Bhattal, and I've particularly looked at romances, I've not looked at religious literature, to see how these were articulating very different mentalities and very different attitudes, which were a complete counterpoint to the Bhadralok literature, because my interest is in other areas, so I looked at secular literature in my book. But what Ahmed says is very important for us. Cheaply sold and in mass circulation, they purported to carry the true message of Islam, urging Muslims to return to a more Islamic code of conduct. By the start of the 20th century, the syncretic practices of the countryside were on the decline. A contemporary noted this with some satisfaction in his memoirs, and I quote, "Earlier Muslims used to participate in a lot of un-Islamic recreations, but then on, Muslims stopped visiting Hindu households to watch jatras and hear Pachali songs. Hindus had also been used to receiving subscriptions from Muslims for public entertainment, like the Durga Puja, which both groups used to subscribe to, on Hindu religious occasions. However, even these had stopped altogether in more recent times." So this was something that contemporary records in records for us is very telling. So great was the influence of the Perso-Arabic vocabulary that verbs were compounded out of Perso-Arabic words, and this is where I think what Sen says comes in very, very handy and very relevant for understanding what this backlash was like. So this is pretty much what Sanskrit had done to the Bengali of the Hindu Pundits was being done in a reverse fashion for the Musalmani Bengali. That is, the influence of Perso-Arabic takes over the living version of the language. And here, this is what we find. We find that great was this influence of the Perso-Arabic vocabulary that verbs were being compounded out of Perso-Arabic words and even used as prefixes and suffixes in the language. To further highlight the identification, the usual left-to-right pattern of the Bengali script was reversed to follow the Persian and Arabic style of writing from right to left. To maintain consistency, even the printed or manuscript pages of Musalmani Bengali works were bound in the opposite direction. So if you look at tracts from that period, they are so that a book would read like that. So that would be the top cover, and your page one would be here as you turn the page. So books would open up and read from right to left. The idea was to make what was seen to be a generally un-Islamic language more acceptable as a medium of religious propaganda. This, Ahmed holds, was in sharp contrast to the Nasihatnamas of an earlier epoch, whose mode of expression was generally as Bengali as the work of any contemporary Hindu author. Educated Muslims, however, and here the class dimension comes in, and this is the dimension that interests me most, even in my wider work. I'm very interested in the class dimension. Educated Muslims were disdainful of this pidgin Bengali, what they saw as pidgin Bengali, and condemned them to the realm of Bottala Puthis. And again, it's interesting that the same term, Bottala Puthis, is being used by both Hindu and Muslim groups to condemn this genre altogether. So concerned was the elite population that official efforts to invent an exclusive language for the Muslims of Bengal on the basis of so concerted was the elite opposition that official efforts to invent an exclusive language for the Muslims of Bengal on the basis of Musalmani Bengali fell through, as elite Bengali Muslims considered it to be inappropriate for use in genteel society. For the elite Bengali Muslims had always identified with Persian and Arabic or Urdu rather than Bengali, and this again is a very interesting dynamic for me, which was perceived as the language of the masses. So the Bengali was the language of the masses, but not Persian and Arabic, or even Urdu. The linguistic divide was thus split along lines of class rather than religion. While religious sentiments and official propaganda coalesced to label the one syncretic Bengali as Islamic or Musalmani, the Sanskritized version of the vernacular secured for itself an unmistakably Hindu essence. The institution of such communal divides represented not just a passing phase in the history of the vernacular. Apart from shaping the separate identities of the two communities in Bengal in the post-independence era, their indelible impact can be seen in current manifestations of the languages in Bangladesh and West Bengal today. Thank you.
We've got time for questions now. What about 15 minutes?
Do you think I should stand because I might not be visible at the back? It's all right, I can stand.
I think you need.
You take it.
Yes. Go here.
Thank you, Anindita. That was really, I've learned a lot from that. Your work kind of reminded me of Joy Chatterjee's Bengal Divided, and her arguments about how the events of 1935, the communal war, how that sort of led up to the division, partition of Bengal. I was wondering if I find your work also somewhat contributed to that partition discourse in the sphere of language, and how, I mean, I see a very clear line and how these communities sort of started to rift, and how, if I'm not mistaken, you argue the politics of language making or Bengali or Sanskritization sort of contributed or may contribute to the discourse of partition of 47 of the Bengal.
I wasn't taking it that far because obviously Joya's concern is for a much later period. I was more interested in the linguistic sphere, and religion is just one thing that I'm interested in. I'm also interested in class. I'm more concerned with language rather than communal identity, although it's quite clear that crops up for the period. My project stops around 1905, so that might give you an idea of where I leave this off. But yes, I don't see how Joy and I are contradicting each other. I think it's the same narrative, except that I don't have much knowledge of her period because my own research stops at 1905, and I'm sure there are other factors as well that need to be brought in for the 1930s. That Joya would be able to better tell you.
Yeah, but surely your work does contribute towards the identity formation that started much before that.
Oh yes.
And it sort of narrates the period through the politics of language of that 1800s and 1700s.
Yeah, but the one thing I think we are quite not sure of is how we can apply the term communal that early. I don't think this was consciously a communal project. I think what I'm trying to do is show how historical processes shape certain historical processes, or the way historical processes shape the destiny of the Bengali language. I don't think this was specifically communal. And in fact, even in the 1870s, the search for self-identity that Rafiuddin Ahmed talks about isn't really communal in that sense, even though, that is certainly also at work. So I think 1930s brings in a completely different set of factors. But overall, I think Joy and I have the same narrative, even though I would hesitate to apply the term communal for my period.
I think